Hi everyone, my name is Brian Lewthwaite. I'm a professor in curriculum and pedagogy. The premise of my work is that there's such emphasis today on the area of quality teaching, but we need to consider what quality teaching looks like from students' point of view, especially those students that don't have access or typically are disenfranchised from science. So what is it that Indigenous students say about effective teaching? And how can this information that's presented from this research augment and maybe even challenge the research that's coming through in general that's associated with the effective teaching literature research is about? My research, I call it a pedagogy of difference or a pedagogy of consequence, because often what we find in classrooms is that there's an indifference to adjusting our practice, especially in science classrooms. We have to recognize that for many of us as teachers, students are finding it difficult to navigate science classrooms because of the protocols and procedures that might be used them, some of the normalized orthodoxies, and that for us as teachers, what we need to do is to adapt our practice, adjust our practice, maybe invert our practice so that it makes science available for all students, and not just those that carry the capital to succeed in those classrooms. So I would ask you, before I even begin, what does effective teaching look like for, in this case, Indigenous students? What does that teaching look like? If we want to do effective teaching in our communities for our students, especially our Indigenous students, although this might be relevant across all cultures, is it just about bringing in cultural content that's specific to that culture? Or is that what we call a culturally responsive teacher? Or is it more than that? Is it just about changing the what of the learning? Or is it also about changing how of our learning? Culturally responsive teaching is not just about changing the content matter of what we're teaching to be more inclusive of students' cultural backgrounds, but it's also about trying to make sure that we adjust our very practice, especially in terms of how we interact and communicate with our students. In my work, what I've been able to do is talk to a lot of Indigenous parents in particular. This is in Canada and New Zealand and Australia. But they talk about the fact that there are issues systemically with science education that cause kids to often not engage or to be successful in science classrooms. They often will talk about their history with education and that their history is not particularly positive. Children will often go into science classrooms very cautious, not only in the science classroom but in schools in general, and that teachers need to be aware of that in interacting with students. They also comment on the fact that kids are having to switch code when they go into classroom, that their behaviors, their speech, their manner of conduct, how they work in the classroom changes as a result of their home culture in comparison to the classroom orthodoxy that might be required in science. They want their children not to be seen with deficit. They want their children to be seen with asset, and often that they're marginalized in classrooms because of who they are and the cultures they represent. They want the learning priorities not just to be about subject matter acquisition, but to make sure that there's also an emphasis on their children's cultural identity. And they also want the learning priorities to be beyond just simple achievement. And so there are trust issues. And for you, first and foremost, what you need to do is demonstrate in your class as a responsive teacher in science education is just an affinity to that student in terms of how you respond to them as an individual, seeing that every child that you work at has the potential to learn and has the potential to succeed, and not to believe that science and its success is reserved for only a particular kind of student. In my work, what we've been able to do is we've been able to develop a profile which is available online through pedagogyofdifference.com or pedagogyofconsequence.com, where you can fill out and answer a wide variety of questions that will give you a profile of how your effective teaching is for what I would call cultural difference, not just for Indigenous students. And although these instruments have been developed for particular nations and particular Indigenous peoples, I believe they really bring to the foreground what might be some of the elements of effective teaching necessary. So the 66 questions identify these particular attributes. And when the instrument is completed, as an example in the area of pedagogical expertise, here's some of the things that it tries to assess. So one of the things that's identified as a big important factor in pedagogical expertise are things like how you position yourself as a teacher. Are you as an authority, or are you more of a facilitator of learning? Do you make use of narrative to provide a context for learning? Is something that's strongly encouraged by students. So all of these elements just try to give you some indicators as to what are some practical aspects that can be used in science classrooms to be more responsive to teachers and their learning need. To go to the website to complete the profile. It'll give you some indicator of where you might be strong and where you might be weak. This profile allows teachers to examine their practice and to cause what they might have to do to make change. If students are going to experience success, a lot of that is going to fall upon us to adjust our practice to allow that to occur. Rhonda Craven says, the future of our nation rests on the quality of our teachers and their willingness and ability to make a difference.